Well, it's good to see you all. I hope I have something worthwhile tonight to discuss. Well, I know we got something worthwhile to discuss. I hope I do an adequate job presenting it. Before we get straight into the lesson, Ernestine asked that I say a bit about the picture. I think I did maybe the first class that we had of Daniel. This picture is particularly significant to Daniel. Daniel would have seen this very tile because it was constructed by Nebuchadnezzar while Daniel was one of his chief administrators there in Babylon. This tile came from a gate in Babylon, and it was the whole wall. Long as that wall came to a major gate, and they had these lions and other animals made out of these ceramic tiles on that wall. This particular panel, along with several others, is in the museum in Istanbul, and they right over there. The more spectacular view and a reconstruction of a never know if it's on or off. I get it. Okay. The reconstruction of the gate. This is actually this is actually the material from the gate in Babylon. The Germans, archaeologists, were in Babylon in the early 1900s. Before the people of that area realized that this was significant. It was just an old ruins. The German archaeologists came in, and this is in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin, Germany. They took the gate apart and went and reconstructed it there in Germany. So this is a gate that Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar would have walked through on a regular basis. The city of Babylon was really two cities. It had an outer wall and an inner city. This was the main entrance into the inner city. And so you can imagine a gate this spectacular, probably the royal parties and all those things would have come in through this gate. And as I say, Daniel would have seen this gate. And so there's several of these ceramic reliefs that are on this. And there was, you can see on the forest, all the way down, there was a continuous wall of these lions and other animals that were on that. So I think, to me, this gives us a little bit of the spectacular beauty and the artistry of the Babylonians to be able to construct them. These are 2,500-year-old ceramic tiles. Now, they were put together pretty well, weren't they? And you see you can see better on the one that is, you can see up close. That's pretty good artwork, I would say. And it took some time to accomplish that. And so they were wise people. They were capable people at this time. And Daniel's a part of that. And this was accomplished under Nebuchadnezzar. And so I just wanted to go back and do that just a little bit. Now, where we are tonight with a lesson, I killed it. The button is sticking. The button's sticking down on me or something. There it is. Okay. Where we're tonight, we're to the writing on the wall. Remember last week we're in chapter 5. And I think I just want to start with the first of the 23rd verse of chapter 5, because that's kind of where we left off last week. Daniel has just finished preaching Belshazzar a sermon. And one of the greatest sermons that you could have in the Old Testament. He says, you knew this and you didn't pay any attention to it. And we talked about that last week. In verse 23, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. You've exalted. And so why have we got all this writing on the wall? You have chosen to exalt yourself against the Lord of the heaven. He goes ahead and talks about you brought the vessels out of his house. You drunk out of them. You made mockery of him. You made fun of him. And so, we have an old saying, I don't want to stand too close to you. The lightning might strike you. Well, lightning struck, didn't it? The handwriting came on the wall because they blasphemed God. Now, we already know that from that, Daniel has explained that he's condemned in that, and his kingdom is going to take away. I want to look at just a little bit tonight these the writings on the wall. Now, first thing I'm going to say about the writings on the wall is the translators have had a particularly hard time with these words. If you read different translations of the scriptures, the words will vary just a little bit. And there is we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, but all the original nuances of the words are not obvious in English to us. And it's sort of like we have sayings that are dependent upon the language. These seem to be three words that are very much dependent upon the language. We've got Daniel's explanation of what to mean, but I believe this was like a riddle. Sometimes we have riddles as for us to solve the meaning of the riddle. I believe these three words were a riddle, and Daniel comes to solve the riddle for them. So first, I want us to look at what Daniel explains the meaning of these words. So now this is the inscription that was written on out. I believe that they all could read the words of the inscription, but they had no idea what they meant because it's out there before them. It's visible. It's not like Nebuchadnezzar's dream where it was all in his head and nobody could, but this was visible on the wall and they all could see it. Mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the inscription of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. So, and the second one is tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. I guess you noticed in the New American Standard Translation, they used upharsin up there in verse 25, and they use Peres down here in verse 28. We'll look at this just a little bit. So God has numbered the days of your kingdom. You have been weighed in the balances and found lacking, and your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. This, just from what Daniel interprets, is a message of accountability, wouldn't you say? Anytime you have a set of scales and you're going to weigh something on the scales, you're taking account of something. So we have the idea of that this numbered here, your days, is probably better understood. He has counted your reign. Rather than counting how many days you're there, he's taken account of your reign, or he's weighed your reign. And then and it's been put on the scales, the balances, and you've been found it didn't weigh out like it should. And because of that, he's divided and given to the Medes and Persians. I'm having more trouble with this thing tonight. Okay. Some of the translators think that the words were really were manna, shekel, and half manna is what they think the words were. Now, manna, you remember from the New Testament that manna was a weight of measure. It's a way of measuring silver or gold if they had a manna. And then the shekel, we're maybe a little more familiar with that. It's another weight to measure by. So if they would go to buy something to have a set of balance scales, and if you were going to buy a manna of it, they'd put a manna weight on this side and pour you a mina of stuff on this side. A shekel is thought to be 1/50th of a mina. And a perez or upharsin is half of a mina. So if it's a riddle, he said a mina, which is the larger weight, a shekel, a little weight, and a half mina or a divided weight. And so it's like it's a riddle. There's a full weight, a little weight, and a half weight. Seems to be the idea there. And then you see how that fits with, we've weighed your kingdom. And it's like we wanted a mina and we got a shekel. And we're going to divide that thing. It seems, to me, that's based on what they read from some of the commentators, that seems to be the idea. How often do we see in the scriptures that we have riddles or usages of words that both have a verbal meaning and a meaning that goes along with a symbolic meaning? And so he's very definitely, he's talking about weighing something, and he's using a riddle that contains units of measure. And I think that's interesting how Daniel does that. Again, that fits, that's just another evidence that this is a book of wisdom literature. Ed?
I work in the clerk's office. Of course, we deal with public life. Every year, we have an audit.
Okay.
Where the auditors are going to come in, they're going to count the money, they're going to count the inventory, and we had better not be found wanting.
Right. You'd better.
That's very unsure. God had given him a kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's counting him to see what have you done with that kingdom.
Okay. And I do think the suggestion there is he has come up really short. If you've only produced 1/50th of what, not to say that this is the numbers, but he's saying, you've really come up short on the scale here. It's what he's saying to him. So, any other thoughts on that part of it?
He says Mene 2 times.
Pardon?
He says Mene 2 times in verse 25. And I think it's for emphasis. Most assuredly.
Yes.
This is going to happen.
Right.
Your time is up.
Yes.
It's limited. Your time is up.
Right.
I think it's interesting that he says it that way. I think, this is God's eternal scales, and they're always right. Mm-hmm. And someday we'll all be weighed on those eternal scales.
Right.
But with Jesus Christ, Jesus makes the difference.
Okay. And we're going to be 1/50th of a mina. And Christ is going to balance the scales for us. So I did think that was interesting. And so any other thoughts on that before we go on? Okay. We're going to jump. Well, no, I get the useless in verse 29 there, the useless bestowing of the treasures upon Daniel. He receives these, he goes ahead and gives him, makes a proclamation, makes him the third ruler of the kingdom. If this feast was at night, this is only going to last a few hours, because as we're going to get to verse 30, that same night, Belshazzar, he is slain. So he places all of that and gives him the third ruler, and that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean, is slain. For those of you who are here this morning, Dempsey kind of covered some of these things from a historical perspective this morning. There are 2 Greek historians that have recorded quite a bit about the fall of Babylon. This is one of those significant times in the Bible that we have both the biblical record and we have the secular or the historic record about the same night. And a couple of things I think are really significant. Both of the historians mention that they were partying in Babylon, as if it didn't make any difference to them. Daniel mentions they were partying in the night. They also mentioned that Belshazzar was killed that night. And Daniel says, yes, he was killed that night. And so there's just remarkable agreement here. And then it says, so Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. This kingdom that is now coming on is as Dempsey mentioned this morning, it's the combination of the Medes and the Persians, with the Persians being the primary power. The Persians actually came up from the south of Persian Gulf area. I don't have a map here, but they lived down toward the Persian Gulf area, and they came up to the Medes, who were a little bit north, and they subjugated them, but they became a coherent group, and they worked together and conquered Babylon. Well, a couple of things that I read about this based on the historians. Nabonidus, who was Belshazzar's father, we talked about him. He had a general named Gubaru, and his name is pronounced 4 or 5 different ways and spelled 4 or 5 different ways. That's the way I heard it pronounced, so I'm going to use that. Gubaru had a son that went on a royal hunt with Belshazzar. In a fit of rage, Belshazzar killed Gubaru's son. Now, you know that's going to endear you. Here, you're the son of the king Nabonidus, and his general, Gubaru's son, goes with the king's son on a royal hunt. The king's son kills the general's son. Now, when you come home, do you think there's going to be peace in the royal army? Probably not. Gubaru left Nabonidus and joined Cyrus in his army. And history tells us he was the general who led the charge on Babylon to bring the troops into Babylon to conquer it. And some have suggested, and we don't know this, but one of the articles I read said that this Gubaru could very well be Darius. That is his reward for leading the army. Cyrus rewarded his general, Gubaru or Darius, or Darius, all of these generals and kings have 4 or 5 pronunciations of their names. That's his reward, is he gets to be over Babylon, the Babylonian portion of the empire. So I thought that was an interesting background on, was there turmoil in their day amongst the kingdom? There's this continuous of killing of leaders, there's killing of family, there's envy, there's strife, and a lot of that leads to the things that happen. But God is still in control of who is the ruler. But I did think that was interesting. The other thing I thought was interesting, and one of the historians talks about Belshazzar as evil, as the evil king. So he was not a very well-liked king, and his father was not a very well-liked king either in Babylon, because he tried to change, as I mentioned last week, the city god from Marduk to Sin, which was the moon god. And the priests and the people of Babylon did not want to give up their god. And so he was not well liked. And actually, the historians say that the priesthood, or some historians suggest the priesthoods help unlock the gates whenever Cyrus and his army came. And so there was a welcome transition from an evil father and an evil son to Cyrus. Now, some of the things we learn about Cyrus as the leader of the Persian army, he was kind to the captives because he made a decree to send the captives all back to their own homelands, that they could rebuild their cities and they could rebuild their temples, their places of worship. So if we think about from Nebuchadnezzar, who was that gold king, to the end of the Babylonian Empire, we see how it has deteriorated. And now God destroys it and brings in the Medo-Persian Empire, which seems to be some better because now they're going to let the people go home. And so God is, they're changing of empires. That's not to say the Medes and Persians weren't vicious. That's not to say they didn't kill a lot of people, but they seem to have been better than the last of the Babylonian rulers from a historic perspective. Okay, any other thoughts there on this? And so what we're having here, we're having a transition from one empire to another empire. One of the things in the first 5 chapters, we're told over and over again, who rules? God rules. I think the 6th chapter, we've got the changing of empires, changing of the guard. And one of the main points of the 6th chapter is God rules. God still rules under these circumstances. And I think that's really important for them and for us. Do we see any changing of rulers or empires in our day and time? Those that are just a little older than I lived through World War II and saw definitely falls of governments. In my lifetime, we've seen certain governments fall and rulerships change, and we've seen a real war going on right now in Ukraine. But who still rules? It's God who still rules. And I think that's one of the primary messages of all of this for us. In this 6th chapter, we're going to see that it starts off with, now we've had this, Daniel's been very distinguished in the Babylonian Empire. He's been put up at a very, Nebuchadnezzar says he's second to me. And I think by the time we get to Belshazzar, that Daniel has lost that connection with the king because of the evilness of the king. As we see, the king had to be reminded by the queen that Daniel was still there. He's lost that, but now immediately we come back in and Daniel is able to distinguish himself. Now, if what I said is true, or if what the historians have said is true about Gubaru being Darius, he would have known Daniel. He would have known the wise men and the inner workings of the city of Babylon, right? Because if he indeed was one of Barnabas's generals, he would have gone through that gate that we have seen. He would have been in the city prior to this, and he would have. And so it's interesting what we see here in the very first of this, in the first 3 verses. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. Over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel became distinguishing himself among the commissioners and the satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. A couple of things I want us to notice. How would, this seems to be something he does as soon as he becomes governor or king or ruler of Babylon. He appoints 120 people, and he takes Daniel, who we know from our experience with Nebuchadnezzar is at the top of the list, makes him one of his choicest people. How does he know to put Daniel there? I submit to you, he probably already knew Daniel and these other people that he's appointing. And so he's appointing people. What good leaders do is appoint good administrators. And that's how, because the leader can't, and so the whole thing was to administer this new kingdom, a new set of leaders to administer this new kingdom. And so satraps is a word for those who manage the king's affairs, is what it really means. And so you've got 120 people managing the affairs. And Daniel immediately begins to distinguish himself. Well, that's not a surprise to us, is it? The chapter begins with that. And of course, just like when his three friends began to distinguish themselves, we have administrative jealousy, right? And that's what we have in verse 4. Then the commissioners and the satraps begins trying to find a ground of accusations against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could not find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Was he a good administrator? Was he an honest administrator? But they've got jealousy. And I'm going to suggest to you that their jealousy stems from the fact that they either were not qualified or they were not honest. They knew that as long as Daniel was there, they would have to be honest and do a good job. But if they can get rid of it, then we're going to say, going to try to get, they became jealous of him because they wanted his position, or they wanted to continue in their dishonesty, whether it be embezzling or being slouchy in their job. But I suggest they wanted to come up short. But Daniel served the king the same as he served God. And I think that's significant for us. Ed?
And as you pointed out in one of our previous classes, at this point, Daniel was approaching 90.
Right.
And these other commissioners and satraps are the very highest levels of government. So we're not talking about some young kids that are jealous. We're talking about likely aged men who have been in high positions of government themselves, and yet they're still trying to climb to the top.
Right. And I think that's true of the way of life for those that are not following God. We look around our government. Is there any jealousy or in a workplace or any bickering back and forth? It's for those that do not follow God. I think that is generally selfish jealousy is one of the driving forces, and that's what I see this being very much like our living today. They have the same problems that we have today. Okay, other thoughts there. It says, then these men who said we will not find any ground of accusation against Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. Daniel's honor. He is an honorable man. They admit he's an honorable man, and we can't find any accusation against him. So now they know that he's got one thing that he's more devoted to than he is the king. And what is that? He knows that with Daniel, whatever God says takes precedent. So now we've got to somehow separate the king or the king from Daniel, and we've got to use his allegiance to God to separate him from the king. That's kind of their plan that they have in mind. They set a trap. Exactly what they do. The same thing we saw back with Nebuchadnezzar earlier. There's the trap set. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: King Darius, live forever. How many times have we seen that? If you ever meet royalty, the proper words are, "O king, live forever." Daniel's, that's the wisdom of Daniel. Okay, O king, lost my place here. And live forever. Now, all the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the high officials and the governors had consulted together with the king that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document that is the injunction. So now they've got to figure it out. They know that Daniel worships his God regularly. But if they can make an edict that nobody can worship anybody but the king, they've got a wedge. They've got a way of separating Darius from Daniel, and they can get rid of Daniel, get what they want. And so it's obvious how that they planned this, they've connived it, and so they've set the trap to, they're going to try and trap Daniel, but actually they end up trapping themselves. It's a little bit like Haman and Mordecai, right? And so I think this is going to be a lesson for all of us. In our relations with other people, never look to undermine or undercut somebody else for your benefit. That's what they're trying to do here, because it's very likely if it's found out, you'll be there with Haman instead of with Mordecai, or with these fellows. So they set this trap, and the king has been trapped too, right? We're going to learn here. This is not like the back we had when Nebuchadnezzar, primarily from his ego, built this great statue and said, I want everybody to worship this statue. It was a way of getting everybody to have allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar. They've convinced Darius here, the way we can have everybody to have respect and allegiance for you. We've got a new king here. We've got to have loyalty to this new king. We'll get everybody to bow down to this new king and pledge allegiance to this new king. Well, they sold him on that. And so he signs the edict. He does not think through what they have sold him on and how he is now elevating himself to the position of God. Okay. Any other thoughts? The next part, Daniel's faithfulness. To me, this is the center of the chapter. I always pick a center of every chapter. If you've noticed, this is the very center of the chapter. And if you haven't figured it out now, I'm building a stair step down, and we're going to build a stair step back. And it's going to leave the center out here at the end. Daniel's faithfulness. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king. Before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days to be cast in the lion's den? The king replied that the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Then he answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. So Daniel is, a couple of things I want to notice here. One, Daniel does not change his pattern based upon the law of the land. Daniel has already been, nor does he initiate a new pattern. He has already been going to his room, looking out the window that faces Jerusalem. Why do you suppose he faced Jerusalem? Was that in the law of Moses? No. The concept of the law was God resided on the mountain of Jerusalem. So he seems to be facing where God resided, was his idea. He's facing God. It's not he's facing Jerusalem. He's facing God. And he's making his petition before God by a physical position He's making his petition before God, his plea before God. And so he's bowing down before God. He's not bowing down before Jerusalem. I think it's the point here. And so he continues to bow down and make his supplication before God. They see this, and of course they come running to the king. We've set the trap, we've sprung the trap. Now we're going to get to kill Daniel. Because the king's already made the edict that cannot be reversed. So we've got to put him in the lion's den. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. What was the king's attitude toward Daniel? He's the best administrator I've got. He's an honorable person. If I lose Daniel, I lose a lot. This is an injustice. Daniel is loyal to me. And so that's all he could ask for. So he's striving, or he's looking for a way to deliver Daniel, but they're going to squeeze the trap here. O king.
You have to think that this historical account that not every word is written or anything like that. You have to think that the guy takes over, he's the king. He sees Daniel. There's got to be people who said, this is what's happened before you got here. You know, I think that's why he's being stressed about it. You also tricked me. This guy, he's got a history. That's not a good thing to do.
Right. So, but now they're going to squeeze the thing here because of that fact that the edict, once it's made, it cannot be changed. We see the same thing in the book of Esther, right? When they made the edict that all the Jews were going to be brought before and killed, they did not change the edict. They just gave the Jews the opportunity to defend themselves. And God was with the Jews in defending themselves. And actually, they overcame their oppressors there. Here, the king's got no way out except to follow through on the edict, because that's the requirement. These men came by agreement with the king and said to the king, "Recognize, O king, and it's the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no injunction or statute which the king establishes can be changed." Then the king gave the orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." Get my next. The king's remorse we have there in 14 and 15. And now we're going to have the test of God. Is God able to deliver? And it's interesting that the king already, as he says this, he says, the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." I don't know how much Darius knew about Daniel and God. I think this verse suggests he may have known about the Nebuchadnezzar story. And he may have heard about the handwriting on the wall story because he was there. He knows that Daniel, and how often does Daniel serve God? Continually. So you continually serve a God who has demonstrated his power, he will preserve you. And so this king has faith in God. Now, say that he's a monotheist, I wouldn't say that. But he is one who has faith in God and faith and confidence in Daniel's faith. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought for him, and sleep fled from him. I think he's a picture of a king in sackcloth and ashes. What do you think? He is very remorseful. He doesn't bring the entertainers in to drive the bad spirits away or to camouflage his thoughts. He's very remorseful. He cannot sleep. He's in agony. He's grieving because of what he has been tricked into doing with an honorable person. And so we're going to have, God is going to be put to the test, and the king is confident that God will survive the test. Okay, the next thing we have here is Daniel is delivered. And that's 19 through 24. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of the day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. Daniel is honorable before God. He's honorable before the king. He is innocent before both in what he's been doing. Then the king was very pleased and gave order for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. He had faith in his God. He had trusted in God. He had worshiped his God no matter what edict the king made. And the king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, cast them, their children, their wives, in the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Couple of things. That answers the question the skeptics pose, that the lions weren't hungry, is why Daniel didn't get eaten. Well, if Daniel was in there all night with them, one person was there all night with a group of lions, and their appetite didn't eat that one person. How come they consumed a whole group of people the next day? They were hungry, they were vicious, and they would consume them. Of course, the obvious answer to that question is, do not try to undercut or undermine somebody else. Have respect for them, and don't let your jealousy get the best of you in any circumstance. I think that's a lesson we learn from these people. But I think the lesson for to me, for all of us from Daniel and his life, is that we serve God and we serve the king, but we serve God first, no matter what the law is. Now that is particularly applicable in our time. And it may be a lion's den problem for us in the near future, because we have laws that are being made by cities and groups of people that are contrary to the scriptures. We still have to live with our faith in God in spite of those laws. Not that we're going to adopt new living patterns. We're going to continue the way to live we are and with God's teaching, no matter what the people around us or the nation enacts as a law. Now, we're so near the end of the chapter, I want to go ahead and finish this. And finally, Daniel is elevated here at the end. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, men of every language who are living in all the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. And then here we have his declaration. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. His dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel, well, I'm going to stop there, and I got a comment or two on 28. So the declaration again, we have had this in every chapter, that God rules among men. He rules forever, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. That's been every, and so I think that's what the whole book of Daniel is about that idea. God rules, man's kingdoms come and go. We just saw one transition right here in chapter 5 and 6. Man's kingdom come and go, but God's kingdom rules. It spans this transition, and there was no change for Daniel and his faith with the change of man's kingdom. Same God, same faith at this change. And so Darius has some recognition of that and proclaims that the same as Nebuchadnezzar did back in chapter 3 it was, yeah, or 4, chapter 4. Yes, Eddie?
Man, I've never seen this until you went through this class tonight. This is the story of Jesus. In John 11, we have the Sanhedrin meeting together and they're conspiring together, and they start by saying, a noteworthy miracle has taken place and we cannot deny it.
Mm-hmm.
They said there's nothing that we can attack him with. He's innocent, he's doing what he's doing. So we'll set a trap. They conspired together.
Right.
They got false prophets to say that he was going to destroy the temple. They used that as a tool to try to destroy Jesus. They brought him before Pilate. What did Pilate try to do? Pilate tried to set him free. We read in the Gospels over and over again, at least 3 different occasions where Pilate came back to the Jews and said, he's innocent, I'm going to set him free, let's let him go. And they wouldn't let him. They're strong-arming Pilate. Nobody's our king except sees how they could even say that, to do that. And yet we find that Pilate is upset about that. Pilate, he goes through and washes his hand. But even when they came to get Jesus, what was he doing? He was praying 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel was so specific.
3 times a day.
3 times, and they came while he was praying to catch him in this.
Mm-hmm.
That Daniel stayed faithful, Jesus stayed faithful, and at the end, he's thrown into the pit, supposedly dead. They come early in the morning and find he's arisen. He's alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does the book of Philippians tell us? God raised him up and gave him a name above all names, so that all should worship him. This is the story of Jesus.
Okay. Great thought. Yeah. Yeah. I want us to see another thing, another couple of things, and I know I'm running over tonight. Am I running over about on time? Am I running over? Shut up and sit down. Huh? That's what Tammy said. There will always be opposition because Satan is behind opposing God. There will always be opposition. In Daniel's case, in his 3 friends' case, in Jesus's case, in our life, there's always going to be opposition. And remember the visions we've had here in the book of Daniel, the vision we're going to have in the 7th chapter. Satan is always driving opposition. That's one of the overriding pictures of the book of Daniel. Satan is driving opposition. God is going to overcome. And so that's what we have. And finally, Daniel does get elevated to an extremely high position. He enjoys this success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus. I don't think this is suggesting that he lived always, because we know he's near 90 right now, if not already 90. We don't have any indication he outlived Cyrus or Darius, either one. But he lived into their reigns, is the idea. So I think the point is he spanned the Babylonian and into the Persian Empire, serving God, and God is still reigning, so Daniel's still serving him. I think that's one of the main points of this chapter. Well, and that gives me just 2 things to conclude with. God is ruler over Medes and Persia, and God takes care of his people. That's the message. So thank you all for letting me wander on tonight, long past, and Next week, I will guarantee you that I will not go long on Sunday night because Brother Wayne will be here. I can't guarantee that he won't, but I'll guarantee I won't. Thank you.
One reminder that group one, we're having dinner at La Rosa and Brandon's house, South of the Drive. Coach, invite everybody to have dinner on here. Next time.